Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my ranking of Doctor Who Series 13, or Season 39, also known as Doctor Who Flux, which is the second series-long Doctor Who story after Season 23's The Trial of a Time Lord. Note, Season 16, The Key to Time, was not a 26-part story. That was like 6 stories contributing to part of an arc. But Season 23 was a 14-part story, and Flux is a 6-part story, both spread across the run of a season. But like with the Trial of the Time Lord reviews, where I reviewed each of the 4 segments that made up that story, the 4-part The Mysterious Planet, the 4-part Mind Warp, the 4-part Terror of the Vervoid, which were the first 4, 5th to 8th, and 9th to 12th parts, and the last 2 episodes, The Ultimate Foe. Each of those are segments and got their own individual reviews, and then I ranked them based on preferability of those 4 segments in the Season 23 ranking. With Series 13, it's going to be the same. I'll be ranking each of the 6 individual episodes, which have their own titles, their own focused plots, but also contribute to this big 6-part story. So this ranking will be ranking the 6 episodes of this series, similar to how Season 23 was the 4 segments of 3 4-part and 1 2-part stories that made up a big 14-parter. I would also like to mention that Eve of the Daleks will not be counted in this ranking, which is why the review is coming afterwards, because I'm going to be doing a separate ranking for the 3 specials following Series 13, similar to the 2008 to 10 Series 4 specials and the 2013 Series 7 specials. I did rankings for those individual mini-series, I guess you can call them, as opposed to being part of the Series 4 and 7 rankings, respectively. So in this case, the Eve of the Daleks, Legend of the Sea Devils, and the as yet untitled, sorry, that was silly, as yet titled, to be titled, Centenary Special, title to be announced, rather, they're going to be in their own separate ranking. Which is why the Eve of the Daleks review will follow this ranking. And also, one more thing before we start, I apologise for not being so active on YouTube over the last couple of months. There's been a couple of timing issues, but I hope to bring a few more videos over the next couple of months, especially got to catch up on several movie reviews over the since the end of September. Got to catch up on several movies I saw at the cinema at the end of 2021 and the start of 2022. So I've got to bring some of that around, and also got to check out and review some of the animated Doctor Who stories since August 2020. I've also got to check out all the versions of the animated stories of. I've also got some Doctor Who animated stories to check out. We'll check out all the versions of that came out in 2021. And I've also got some Doctor Who animated stories to check out all the versions of that came out in 2021 as well, and then review those. So with that all out of the way, the Series 13 ranking. This ranking will consist of the episodes as following: Flux Chapter 1, The Halloween Apocalypse; Flux Chapter 2, War of the Sontarans; Flux Chapter 3, Once Upon Time; Flux Chapter 4, Village of the Angels; Flux Chapter 5, Survivors of the Flux; and Flux Chapter 6, The Vanquishers. So, let's get down to the ranking, starting off with number 6. Okay, number 6. I did rewatch these episodes quite recently for this ranking to get the finalised version of this particular version of the ranking. It might get an update later down the line. The reviews might get revision versions later on. Some of the scores have changed, but which I will mention in this ranking, as opposed to changing in the actual videos or having to need to redo the reviews sooner than later. But after checking out these episodes again for this ranking, I felt this one was the weakest on a story level. Most of out of the episodes, this one felt like the weakest of the stories, and it is Flux Chapter 5: Survivors of the Flux. The fifth episode and penultimate episode of the series. This one kind of just feels like, sadly, filler in a series that's only 6 episodes, and where every episode has to count. I made a point about this before the series came out, before we even knew it was going to be 6 episodes. Heck, before we even had the announcement that there was only 8 episodes in production. When after series 12, I was thinking series 13 can't have episodes like Orphan fucking 55. It's got to make every single episode count for the Timeless Child arc that they were going to carry on. And even more so now that it's only 6 episodes and focusing on this 6-part story. Episode 5 doesn't quite deliver on that. It doesn't really count. Okay, some side of it does contribute to the Timeless Child arc with the Doctor meeting Tecteun, but there isn't really much done with it. The Doctor reunites with Tecteun and learns that the Vision are trying to attempt to go to another universe. Tecteun created the Flux to get rid of the Doctor and was the one who wiped her memories. They got the fob watch, and that's really about it. There isn't really much else going for it. We don't even know that much about the Vision. It's just kind of it interferes with other people's times and lives, but that's about it. The rest of the episode isn't really that much interesting either. Yaz, Dan, and Jericho are just going around the world trying to find out when the world's going to end. And it's only really towards the end of the episode where they realise they've got to go and see Joseph Williamson, or at least go to the Williamson tunnels to actually find a way to get back to the 21st century. And it just feels like a detour for these guys. Just they've spent 3 years already, and now they're just going around the world doing feck all, basically. The whole fetch your dog thing is more to tie in with what happens in the next episode rather than what happens here, and it just doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. And also, how did the Grand Serpent send an agent or two back in time, and why is he trying to stop them? That's never explained in this episode or the next episode, why servants of the Grand Serpent are trying to stop Yaz, Dan, and Jericho. It just makes little sense. And speaking of Grand Serpent, I'm not sure why he's here beyond episode 3. Craig Parkinson is brilliant, and he gives a great villain performance, but I don't know why the Grand Serpent is working with the Sontarans, why he's trying to develop units only for them to be shut down several decades later, and what's the point of him even doing on Earth? I get he's a refugee or a survivor of the Flux sort of thing, hence Survivors of the Flux. Doesn't quite make a lot of sense in that title, to be honest. But why is he trying to conquer the Earth? What's the point? If we learned a bit more motivation about him, maybe it would have made sense. But I think he could have been cut altogether, and we just expanded on the Doctor and Tecteun story, Yaz, Dan, Jericho story, and the Vinder and Bell stories. Those are quite fun, although Vinder doesn't go very far. He meets up with Diane, and then they have to try and work out a way to get out of the passenger form, which they do in the next episode. Bell's probably the story that has the straightest line, as she's diverted from meeting up with Vinder where Swarm and Azura are, and is instead joining Carvanista, not by her choice, and they have a bit of a fight before they have to team up to fight Sontarans. So Survivors of the Flux, on a story level, it feels like there's too many things going on, and some of them could have been cut altogether. Same could be said for the next episode, but I think this one just feels like filler, and scenes like at Unit or with the Grand Serpent, or even some of the Yaz, Jericho, Dan stuff and some of the other characters, it just feels like filler. And what this episode should have done is delivered more answers about the Timeless Child arc and or the Flux arc, but what we kind of get is just kind of some basic information and not for very long. It's a shame. This is probably the most disappointing episode of the series. On an execution level, it works to an extent, but I don't know. I don't think Azar Shazim is quite as great with the execution of these episodes as Jamie Magnus Stone. I think his episodes were a bit more polished. Well, Azar Shazim's are quite messy, actually. And spoiler alert for this ranking, all 3 of his episodes are bottom 3 of this. This is not a dig at the director. He did the best he could, and especially as a newcomer to the series, and he was thrown in the deep end with episode 3. But I think his episodes are a bit more messier in the visuals, rather than Jamie Magnus Stone, who can at least turn a messy story, can at least look cohesive, with the possible exception of the Timeless Children itself. But I can at least, and maybe Essential to Simon as well, but at least I think the episodes in this series, I think he manages to make them look a little less complicated and less messy than as Shazim's. Again, no offense to him, I just think his episodes look a bit more messy compared to Jamie Magnus Stone's, and on screen, and and this episode just felt like half of it didn't even need to happen. I think we could have replaced half of it with stuff that would have actually benefited the story, or would have benefited the arcs or the character growth. Although I will admit there was some nice character moments with Yaz and the hologram, and some nice conversation moments, and also that hermit guy was fun. I really liked him, and he was funny. But yeah, there's not a huge amount going for this on a story level, besides a few good moments, and execution is mostly good. But I think, like I said, I think Azure Shazim's episodes are a bit more messy on the execution side than Jamie Magnus Stone's. When I initially did this episode's review, I gave it an 8 out of 10, but I've now lowered it down to 6. It's still above the midway point, because it's still got some entertaining moments, and there is some good execution and some good moments in the script, but overall it feels like half of it could have been replaced with stuff that could have helped with the story of Flux, or the Timeless Child stuff, or the Division, etc. You don't have to save it all for the Centenary special, Chris. You could start explaining stuff in the final 2 episodes of this series. And the final episode I'll get to that in a bit, but it kind of puts that to the side to wrap up the Flux stuff. So, yeah, this could have been a good time to start opening up more about Division, but what we get is kind of like basic level stuff, and a few stuff with Tecteun, but that's really about it. Again, you don't have to save everything for the Centenary special. Moving on with the ranking, number 5. This episode was initially the episode I had last on the ranking after seeing the episodes for the first time, but following Survivors of the Flux's demotion, this one has bumped up a little bit to this place. I also kind of enjoy it a bit more after watching it again more recently than when I did the first 2 times back in November, and that is Flux Chapter 3, Once Upon Time. And I recently only just realised, there's a pun in that title. Once Upon Time. Not Once Upon Time like a story, like Once Upon the planet Time, or Atropos, aka the planet Time. Now I get it. Also, this episode is way better than another story that has a similar sounding title. Twice Upon a Time bullshit. But yeah, anyway, this is actually a pretty good episode. But I feel like the problem I had more at the time was that it did feel like some similar problem to what I've got with Survivors of the Flux now. And that's the fact that I thought this was the filler episode at the time. This was the one that felt like the filler episode midway through the series, and then it was going to pick up steam as we head towards the finale. But actually, this episode does work as the closest episode we get to learning more about the Division, plus a few bits of dialogue from episode 5. But we actually get to see the 13th Doctor take on the role of the fugitive Doctor, and her companions, and Vinda taking on the roles of Carvanista and 2 others that we don't actually see. I'm betting it's Gat and Lee from Fugitive of the Jadoon, but we don't actually know yet. And we see them in this kind of like this timeline thing, whatever's going on, and stopping Azure and Swarm, and sort of kind of tying into episode 1, but not really. kind of, it's just sort of how they're defeated. And I guess that leads to Swarm being imprisoned, as we saw in episode 1, and Azure is exiled to Earth and forced into human form and guarded by this other division member, and memories are sort of messed about with. It doesn't really make an awful lot of sense with her, but there's sort of kind of like the hints of, it's kind of what they've done, but it's not really a full circle kind of thing with it. But Vinder and Bell stories that we see in the episode are pretty good, and now that I'm grateful Bell isn't another what was his name? Brendan from Essential to Simon. She wasn't another pointless character just throw in there to distract us from the stories. No, she's actually a new key element of this story going forward, and it's probably the most fun story on reflection. And Vinder's is a great story as well, though I would have liked maybe one of the other characters to fill in the role of the guard at the Grand Serpent's layer instead of just Yaz in every single scene, because she's already taken the role of the commander, so maybe Dan could have been the guard or something. But yeah, Bell and Vinder's stories in this episode were handled pretty well. Yaz and Dan were a little bit more disappointing, but with Dan's we got to see a bit more of his romantic relationship with Diane, and well, I guess Yaz, we just got to see more Yaz, I guess, and also tie the Weeping Angels into the next episode. I guess it's not really explained what the Weeping Angels are doing here, but besides one of them trying to hijack the TARDIS at the end to tie in with next episode. But yeah, but I think the issue with Survivors of the Flux is that at the time it felt like a diversion from what's going on, but actually it does tie in with the arc of the Flux and the Timeless Children a bit more. I suppose it's really a matter of what you're looking for with this episode. If you're looking for an installment that ties in with Flux, or one that actually does something with the Timeless Child / Division arcs, or maybe it's because it wasn't quite as fresh or exciting following the pretty damn brilliant War of the Sontarans. More on that, and also the next episode, Village of the Angels, later. But I think Once Upon a Time still delivers as being a pretty good episode, even if it's not quite an amazing episode. I'd say it's good. A bit messy in places, but pretty good in others. The score I gave this one upon its release or broadcast, I should say, was 7 out of 10, and this is one of the 2 scores I am standing by for this ranking. Of the other 4 have had some score changes. 3 going down, 1 going up. More on those later. But first, number 4. It's a weird thing to say that the 4th best episode of a 6-episode series, not including specials, is the best of the 3 so far series finales in the Chibnall era. I say so far. Technically, the Centenary special will also count as a finale, sort of. But yeah, besides the upcoming Centenary special, and even then, it could go either way anyhow, this episode is the strongest, both as a story overall and individual episode, best series finale of the Chibnall era. Flux Chapter 6, The Vanquishers. Okay, so The Vanquishers, it's kind of a similar issue to Survivors of the Flux, where it kind of doesn't really discuss the division stuff, and it focuses on following up with the Flux stuff, but because Survivors of the Flux took so much time doing feck all, Vanquishers has to spend as much time as possible wrapping up all of the Flux stuff, as well as some of the pointless story stuff that we've seen in some of the other episodes, specifically the previous one. And it's got to jettison some of the division stuff in order to save it for maybe Centenary Special, by the sounds of it. And because it's got to do so much, it's got to wrap up the Sontarans' second invasion stuff and the Grand Serpent stuff. It's got to wrap up Swarm and Azure. It's got to wrap up all of the supporting characters' stories, if they're still here. Now including Kate Stewart, who's come back for basically the Captain Jack role in Series 12, where they turn up, they contribute a little bit to the story, but not enough, and then they go away again. but they might come back at a later point if rumours about Unit's appearance in the Centenary special are going to be true. But yeah, that's a bit disappointing. Kate Stewart doesn't really do a huge amount to do in this story, and neither does Joseph Williamson, and he keeps popping up every now and again. With the exception of the 4th episode, he's like in every single episode for like a bit, and then he helps everybody get back to the 21st century, and they've got these tunnel things and everything, but he's basically just there. It's a shame. I have to admit, when I first saw the scene with the Sontaran in the shop and liking sweet stuff and going, chocolate, I did find it funny at the time, but now I think it's a bit of a misguided moment. It's kind of like forced humour a little bit, I guess. And could have spent a bit more time maybe with Kate or with Joseph Williamson or some of the other characters and wrapping up some of the story. And again, same with the whole Grand Serpent stuff in the first place. I suppose it's a way to bring back units after them being disbanded off screen by the time Resolution came around, but you could have saved that problem by not even doing that in the first place. Oh well, at least we didn't have some sort of tie-in with that awkward joke about the conversation in that episode. Ugh. And this is from someone who really likes that episode. Also, similar to a Shad in the Series 12 finale, both Swarm and Azure are just killed off here by time, apparently. They're really interesting villains. I would like to have known a bit more about them, and they're just killed off. The same happened with Tectoon and Survivors of the Flux. And that was on Swarm and Azure, by the way, that time. At least these guys got at least 6 episodes to show off their villainy, or give or take 6 episodes. I don't think Swarm was in episode 4, but give or take 5 or 6 episodes to show off their villainy, and at least they got to show that off, as opposed to Tectoon, who just had 2, maybe 3, and a Shad who just had 3 as well. It's a bit like with the executive in Time Agent. In the 3rd series, he has about 5.5 episodes of being a great villain, well, 4.5 and a bit. And then he goes away and the main characters have to deal with this giant flower alien. But at least he got most of the series to show, compared to Katrina Mills, the villain of the Series 2 finale of Time Agent, who had half an episode to show off her villainy. So at least Swarm and Azir get the executive from Time Agent treatment as opposed to the Katrina Mills treatment. But again, it would have been nice if they maybe, well, I suppose it was inevitable they were going to be defeated at the end of the series, but it would have been nice to know more about these guys. We don't really know a huge amount about them, and like I said, the tie-ins to where they were at the start of the series isn't entirely shown. We can just assume that what I mentioned earlier is what happened, and what led to them being there in their places, Swarm being trapped where he was after being captured and Azure exiled. I'm also not sure why we have the Sontarans coming back at the end of the series, considering they just had an invasion at the start. I suppose it's so they could have another go at it. But, that's not really a criticism, that's just like, okay. But what we do get is sort of the Flux kind of destroying stuff. We don't really get, whilst we get the Flux being absorbed by a passenger form, most of that universe is still kind of destroyed. So a lot of the universe is gone, lots of Daleks and Cybermen are gone, and Sontarans, which is probably best of the characters, but it does raise the question how many of them were out there all this time, especially as there's at least 3, maybe even 5 Daleks in Eve of the Daleks, depending on what moment in the episodes you're looking at. All in all, the Vanquishers is trying to tie up so much in 60 minutes, plus provide emotional and satisfying endings for most of the characters, and tie up most of the ends of the series arc, but still leaving some stuff of the general story arc left for later down the line, because the last episode didn't do enough to explain about that, so we got to wait until the Centenary special, maybe Legend of the Sea Devils, but we'll see when that comes out. Not Eve of the Daleks, though. That one doesn't really touch in the Timeless Child arc, but it does kind of feel like an epilogue to this one, in a way, so that does feel good. More on that in the review, when I get to that, hopefully. When I originally reviewed this episode, I gave it an 8 out of 10, but now it's gone down to a 7 out of 10. However, it's still the best series finale of the 13th Doctor and Chibnall eras. It's better than Battle of Ranskow of Kaulos, and it's better than both Essential Simon and the Timeless Children as a single story, and it's especially more than the Timeless Children as an individual episode. Moving on to number 3, this one has actually kind of flipped around the ranking a couple times, but I think where it places now kind of reflects my opinion of it back when it first aired, but with a slightly lower score. I did initially give it a 9 out of 10 when it aired, then an 8 for the re-edit for the review, and now it's gone down to 7. So to say it's the third best story of the series is kind of a surprise, but yet I did feel like it was a really good episode at the time, and now reflecting on it, it's still one of the better ones of the series, although like I said at the time, it really depends on how the finale goes and how the rest of the series goes. And now that the rest of the series is out, yeah, this one is kind of a bit damaged because of that. So number 3 is Flux Chapter 1, The Halloween Apocalypse. Whilst I did like the introduction to Dan and Carvanista, the episode did feel a bit messy whilst trying to set up all of these plot elements and then throw us into the Flux arc like that, like really straight in. And yeah, that wouldn't be too bad if it was given a bit of a better structure. And I think what does hold this one down quite significantly is the structure of some of the story arcs. There's so many characters introduced and so many elements set up within the first 15 minutes of the episode, whilst also trying to be a Dan Carvanistas episode. And I think the structure of this one works a bit better than, say, the last two, or maybe even parts of the third one, because it's building it up. It's the first episode. It's the introductory episode. It's setting everything up. So I do think it structurally works a bit better there. Also because Jamie Magnus Stone is directing this one, he has at least makes it look a bit more. Well, at least he's able to make it look less messy than. Again, no offense, Azim Shazur's episodes. This is partly also on a story level as well, but I think Magnus Stone is able to make it look more cohesive in this episode. On a positive note, the introduction feels very Doctor Who, and it works really well into tone with the story. It's great that we have an episode set on Halloween, broadcast at Halloween. This is great. Carvanista, whilst he does look a bit silly initially, it does kind of work as a modern take on something you might have seen in Classic Who, and he's become a fan favorite character, and he's awesome. And Dan's just amazing. Again, both these characters will be even better across the series, but it's just so brilliant seeing the two of them meet for the first time in this one and their interactions across the series starting from here. Oh, that's brilliant. I think out of the messy episodes of this series, this one's the least worst, and it kind of does work as a setup episode, in my opinion. I know not everybody's going to agree with that. But because what came later was more messy or disappointing or just didn't quite tie in as much, or was a letdown, or just ultimately ended up kind of making this episode look a bit weaker on reflection, this episode looks a bit more weak on reflection. So, moving on to number 2. Number 2 is the only episode that had a score change in favour of going higher as opposed to going lower, as we saw with chapters 1, 5, and 6. This time round, it's gone up from 9 out of 10 to 10 out of 10. Yes, I really liked this episode. I thought this was a really strong one, and even when I first saw it, it felt fresh, it felt different, it felt like it was moving away from Chibnall's writing formula of the past 2 series, and it felt like we were going back to basics. It with a few bits to time with the Flux arc, of course, but it felt like it could have been a great standalone story in its own right. It feels great. It was brilliant. It was fun. It was enjoyable, and even the stuff tying in with the arc felt naturally added. In terms of when splitting the 3 main characters up, one of them's got to go and do something to do with the arc, and it does tie in with episode 3 nicely. So, okay, as naturally as it can to this series, The other two focus on what the heck is going on in the episode itself. And this episode is, of course, Flux Chapter 2, War of the Sontarans. This might even be the best Sontaran story / episode. I mean, I do really like the two Doctors and the Sontaran stratagem and Poison Sky. I thought those two episodes were brilliant for the Sontarans' lore and characters. And two Doctors, I just really liked the story. Time War and Sontaran Experiment are also great. Invasion of Time is a guilty pleasure for me, but I think this is probably my favourite Sontaran episode of the series. I don't know if I'd say Flux is my favourite Sontaran story, because they are in 3 episodes of this series, 4 episodes even. They're in Apocalypse as well, but you can definitely say individual episode wise, War of the Sontarans is my favourite. Some great supporting characters. The Crimean War setting works really well. Sontarans manipulating time, using the Flux to their advantage to manipulate time and invade all of time and space, and using the Crimean War as the starting point is really great, and it nicely ties them into fighting one of the biggest and most unnecessary wars in human history. And Mary Seacole is a brilliant guest supporting character, and she's really fun, engaging. The actress does a fantastic job as her, and I loved seeing Dan doing kind of his own sting in Liverpool with his parents, and going to the docks and climbing to the ship and sneaking around with a wok, and having to be bailed out by Carbonista when he gets caught. It's so fun and it's so good. It's so well handled. Brilliant script writing, brilliant direction, brilliant acting. This was a great episode and a much needed breath of fresh air after the aforementioned style of episodes Chibnall has been writing for the last couple of years. This is probably his best standalone episode without a co-writer. Although I do find Rosa and also one more episode from this series, which I believe are better, but those were co-written by other writers, and then other episodes I would put above this one are written by other writers on their own, maybe with a teeny influence from Chibnall, but he's not credited. So I think this is his best individual episode without a co-writer, or being a co-writer on the story. So yeah, well done. This was. We finally got there. We finally got a 10 out of 10 Chris Chibnall solo written episode. So finally, and I did give it a 9 initially, but I'm giving it a 10 now. So finally, whew. But yeah, War of the Sontarans, amazing story. But what could possibly be better than War of the Sontarans? Well, as great as the Sontarans are as a villain, there's another villain in this series, not besides the Daleks and the Cybermen, that have appeared in a previous series, again, also not counting the Ooze either. A previous monster who has appeared in series before this series, that's even better than the Sontarans, and it's not the Daleks, the Cybermen, or the Ooze. And those are the Weeping Angels. I don't know if you could hear me through that. The Weeping Angels. The main villains of my favourite episode of Flux, or Doctor Who Series 13. Number 1 is Flux Chapter 4, Village of the Angels. This is hands down the best episode of the show since The Haunting of Villa Diodati, which was written by this episode's co-writer, Maxine Alderton. And it might even have been her episode, or at least an episode co-written by Chibnall, that would have tied in with the finale of the initially planned Series 13 before things went all flux, thanks to fucking COVID. Fuck this pandemic. More on that afterwards, I guess. But yeah, this episode is fantastic. This is the other episode that retained the same score since I saw it and did the initial review. It's stayed as a 10 out of 10. This is it's the 4th 10 out of 10 of the 13th Doctor. Well, 5th now, because I've changed my mind on War of the Sontarans. It's gone up, which has gone up. But okay, it's the 5th episode, but initially 4th, but the 5th episode now I would give a 10 out of 10 of this era, although being part of the Flux story, Flux does not get a 10 out of 10, as you could probably tell. So I don't know if I can say it's the 5th story, but it's the 5th individual episode. And this episode is just fantastic. This is absolutely amazing. Actually, when I do my top 10 13th Doctor stories updated ranking, which will come after the Centennial special, so we've got all of the episodes and stories. And when I do that, so I'm going to, again, like with the 6th Doctor one and the 80s one, I'm going to count the Flux episodes individually, like Trial of a Time Lord, the individual the segments separate to the full story. So when the 13th Doctor ranking is updated after the Centennial special and the year is over, these episodes could very well, these 2 episodes probably will be top 5, top 6, depending on what the next 2 episodes are like. Maybe, hopefully if the next 2 are 10 out of 10s, then maybe top 5 to 7. But yeah, this episode is so good. The tension is great. The scares are great. The Weeping Angels are at their best written since Blink. And it's just, I mean, it's not as good as Blink, but it's still amazing and handled really well. Even the stuff tying in with the Flux arc, again, still works pretty well. More so with the Bell stuff, Bell and Azure. But also, that cliffhanger is amazing. That's going to be one of the best modern cliffhangers, or at the very least, one of the best 13th Doctor cliffhangers anyway. Alongside the Spyfall Part 1 one as well. But yeah, there's so much good in this episode. There were a few decisions about what the Weeping Angels could do that initially I wasn't so hot on. It's mainly the killing people instead of sending them back a second time. I think the Angels would actually revel in sending people back multiple times, as we saw in Angels Take Manhattan. But I guess in the case of this story, they were doing this whole temporal extraction stuff, so they probably couldn't afford to send people back any further without having to go back in time themselves to do whatever they needed to do. So just killed them. Like, that's my theory. Maybe they just enjoy it. But what I did like was the changes of them not going after the Doctor and not trying to send her back in time once the Rogue Angel made a deal with the others. And also the whole idea of a Rogue Angel worked really well. Especially when Patrick Ness had the idea of doing an Angel Civil War for Class Series 2. And whilst that didn't happen, the idea of maybe some angels aren't like other angels, there is a bit of a some of them might go rogue or something, not necessarily a society or anything, but maybe like one or two of them might say, actually, on second thoughts, I'm going to go and do my own thing. A bit like how the Four and Blink were scavengers compared to the full being rebirthed or regrown army of them in Time of Angels, Such and Stone, and how the ones in Angels Take Manhattan use that one particular building in New York as a battery farm. It feels like it's interesting. Some angels may want to go and do their own thing, and in some cases attempt to desert from being part of the division which they've been hired to be part of. As well as having certain information that division may want back/destroyed, and they want their angel captured or destroyed in order to prevent it being leaked, especially to the Doctor, as it's about them. Ooh, that would have been some fun information to have found out, even in this episode, or Survivors of the Flux. But regardless, but this was still a fantastic episode, and the way the angels communicated with the characters was also really cool as well. This one just adds upon angel lore in a good way. There was a few things initially, like I said, I wasn't initially so hot on, but overall, I think we've had a fantastic angel episode, and it's probably the second best one, or second best TV main Weeping Angel stories, not including cameos and stuff. Main television series story for the Weeping Angels, the second best one after the original Blink, which is still one of the best episodes of the whole show. So that's my ranking of Doctor Who Series 13 or Season 39, also known as Doctor Who Flux. So I'll quickly read out the list again as a reminder and to wrap up this video. Number 6 is Flux Chapter 5, Survivors of the Flux. Number 5 is Flux Chapter 3, Once Upon Time. Number 4 is Flux Chapter 6, The Vanquishers. Number 3 is Flux Chapter 1, The Halloween Apocalypse. Number 2 is Flux Chapter 2, or The Sontarans. And that's the only chapter number episode that's also the same chapter number with the placement on this list. Episode 2 is second place on this list. The others are kind of like for example, episode 5 is number 6, episode 1 is number 3, etc. And number 1, Flux Chapter 4, Village of the Angels. So that's it from my ranking of Doctor Who Series 13, Season 39, Flux. And yeah, sorry for the delay. It's been a while, but I had some... I just haven't had as much time to do these videos much over the last couple months, apart from that boost of doing the initial Flux reviews when they came out, and the War Doctor reviews for the Universal's channel, up to Fortune Fire, that I did do kind of all at once and then just spaced them out release-wise. But besides those, I wasn't able to do as much videos over the last couple of months as I would have liked to. But hopefully I can start getting into the swing of doing some more over the next couple of weeks, months. Hopefully, like I said, still got like quite a few movies from the end of 2021, 9, and up to 5 from the start of 2022 to go as well. And that's not even talking about the animated Doctor Who stories I've still got left. But next time, I will be talking about the 2022 New Year special, Eve of the Daleks. Doctor Who New Year special. And then hopefully we'll be on course to Easter, or that's what we've heard. It's going to be around Easter time for the 2022 Easter/Spring special, Legend of the Sea Devils, and then on course after that, on course for the upcoming yet to be revealed title BBC Centenary special coming. It's probably going to be October, maybe November 2022, and then the end of the 13th Doctor's era. I'll try and get some end of 13th Doctor era and where we currently are at with the show over the first 39 seasons, 59 years videos after that. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching this ranking of Doctor Who Series 13, Flux Season 39. Next time, my review of Eve of the Daleks. So until then, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the Nicholas Payne YouTube channel.